Preliminary results show that the Democratic Republic of Congo's incumbent leader, Felix Tshisekedi, has garnered about 80% of the vote in the much contested poll. Opposition candidates are protesting what they call chaos and irregularities, which marred last week's presidential poll. Tshisekedi, however, insists that the rerun can only happen if more than 50% of the votes had not been garnered. For more on this discussion, Professor Prof. Isike from the Pretoria University's Political Sciences Department joins us. Prof, festive greetings to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Your reaction, firstly, to the current situation out in the DRC.
Well, first, seasonal greetings to you as well. Thank you for having me. It's interesting. I'm a bit surprised that these irregularities and logistics problems occurred. Maybe I shouldn't say I'm surprised. However, I thought that the electoral management body was more prepared for the elections. So what really came to me as a surprise was their decision to start announcing the results in piecemeal. One would have expected that, given the timelines, that results should be announced by the 31st of December. That gave them enough time to start compiling results from after the elections and then start the announcements on the 31st. Announcing results from as early as Monday, when the elections were still going on, and then announcing the results in piecemeal as they have been doing, itself is potential for trouble. There is still a lot to come that could change the votes, the way the results are. However, when you count them the way they've counted them, including the votes of the diaspora, which is something they were doing for the first time, and considering that the majority of the diaspora voted in favor of Tshisekedi, one would think that he would win the elections. It's not surprising that he wins the elections, but not in the margin that is being announced currently. And that in itself gives a facade of irregularity, a facade of a rigging of the results, which do not reflect what is on the ground in terms of the support that the opposition are getting, especially the top two opposition candidates.
Look, Prof, I mean, as I don't know if you're aware, when I introduced my intro there, the latest is that the riot police had to intervene on today's protest, which means that we can certainly expect more violence should, of course, the electoral body insist on announcing the results. And we know that the ban on opposition protests was actually announced, quite interestingly enough, on the day that the opposition leaders had announced that they want to go and march against going ahead of the election. So talk to us about the timing of this report. I mean, this protest was organized by the opposition leaders, and what happens to freedom of speech?
Well, yes, but the reason the government is giving for banning the protests and the kind of response that they've given is the fact that they say the results are still ongoing. The electoral process is still on. Any protest would actually undermine the electoral process itself, and that can become an infraction on the Constitution. So they're saying, we don't say don't protest, but wait for the final results to be announced, for the outcome, for the electoral process to close, and then you can respond. And that seems to be, if you like, given the history of electoral violence and how outcomes have resulted in violence in the past, and the history of violence in the country generally, one would think that that's a responsible thing to do, right? And that's why I'm also cautioning or wondering why the electoral management body decided to start announcing the results early on, when they still had time to at least announce the results by the 31st, or start the announcement by the 31st, when more than 70% of the results would be in, and the margins would be clearer and would not be as distant as they are currently.
And Prof, look, the AU, what should their stance and action be at this particular time? We've seen their silence or lack of proactiveness, even during the Zimbabwe vote, leading many to believe that they're just a toothless body.
Well, the AU is limited in terms of intervening, in these kinds of things. You would expect that countries should be able to organize elections peacefully. You would expect that the results can be contested. legally using judicial means, as we saw in cases like Nigeria. So what the opposition chooses to do, given the history of violence in the country, is very important, going forward. Tshisekedi is not very popular, but at the same time, he was expected to win this election because we have a very fractured opposition. Despite their attempt to come together, the opposition is still fractured. We have two big candidates that could have easily united and given the current president a run for his money, but they didn't do that. And that usually is a causal factor for why dominant parties stay in power, a fractured opposition. But the question is how that is managed and the impressions that have been created by an electoral body that is seen to be very incompetent in the way that it has organized the elections, and then deciding to start announcing the results earlier on, which, I mean, in the first day, it was less than 2 million of the votes counted, and that gave 81% of the votes, which is not surprising, but those kinds of margins do not tell well on those that feel that, the president shouldn't get up to 80% or 81% of the electoral votes at that time. And that's not going to be the final outcome. That's why it's a bit, irresponsible on the part of the electoral management body, the CENI, to have started announcing the results earlier. I didn't see the point of doing that. They could count, but the announcement should have started on the 31st, which is what the Constitution prescribes.
Prof, thank you so much for your contribution. That was Pretoria University's Political Sciences Department, Professor Christopher Isike, on the situation in the DRC.